After Javqua had finished her food, she made her way to the bathroom. She had to wait for Tom to finish up, but once he was done, she was able to freshen up. After polishing her claws and cleaning under her scales, she was ready to leave. Tom, on the other hand, was still changing out of his multi-clothing and into his school uniform. She never realized how many pieces had to be worn by human students. Hers only consisted of 2 pieces, the shirt and the skirt. "Tom, why are there so many pieces to your uniform?" Tom was confused for a second, but realized pretty quickly. "I was given this to wear by my home government. It's usually worn by private school students." As Tom was talking, he was putting on the rest of his uniform. He finished by straightening his blazer. "Okay, ready." Tom and Javqua made their way out of the dorms and towards history class. On their way, Tom noticed a large insectoid creature holding a camera. It was reminiscent of a 7 to 8 feet tall ant. As they got closer to their destination, it was obviously following them, thinking its natural camouflage would be enough to hide from his senses. Not only was it badly hidden, but he could hear it every time it took a step. Tom decided he would ignore it and tell Javqua later. He walked up to the door of the classroom and swiped his student ID over the scanner to allow him and Javqua access. This feature was added after the galactic government found out about humans' tendency for pranks. But they should know better than to think a cheap security system would stop humans from finding a way to prank fellow sentients. The door slid open, and they walked inside and took their chosen seats, again with Tom sitting to the right of Javqua. The teacher, Mr. Hakat, who was another member of the Magistrar. As far as Tom could tell, all staff at the Institution of Learning were Magistrar. It did make sense as it was their homeworld, but still a little unexpected for Tom. Once Mr. Hakat made his way in front of the classroom, he raised his claw to notify the class that the lesson was beginning. "Okay, class, today we will be learning about the worst war in galactic history. This war was so terrible that the only way we were able to stop it was by showing the enemy our concept for nuclear weapons." The class had grim expressions. Even Javqua's expression was grim. Tom, on the other hand, was staring at the teacher with a blank stare, his brain trying to comprehend how a species could surrender just by showing them a concept for something as tame as a nuke. Hell, we had black hole bombs powerful enough to destroy entire systems. A nuke was just pitiful in comparison, and they hadn't even actually made it. Mr. Hakat seemed to have noticed his blank stare. "Tom, what's wrong? Is this too much for you? If you'd like, you can leave until this section of the class is over. I don't want to frighten you too much." Mr. Hakat's voice was sincere. He definitely cared for his students' mental health. How many died in this war?" asked Tom quizzically. Mr. Hakat thought for a moment. "We nearly passed 300,000 deaths. It truly was a tragedy." Mr. Hakat was definitely very sad, as his feathers were as ruffled as Tom thought physically possible. "Oh, is that all? For the largest war the galactic government has ever fought, it's kind of minuscule. Don't get me wrong, it's sad, just not as bad as I thought it would be. It's nowhere near as brutal as World War I, let alone World War II. It was now Mr. Hakat's turn to blankly stare at Tom, just for the opposite reasons. How many died in those wars?" Mr. Hakat was most definitely disturbed by Tom's words. Tom thought to himself for a moment, trying to remember the estimates. Well, in the First World War, approximately 40 million people died. The Second World War had about 70 million deaths worldwide, give or take a couple 100,000. At least half the class had fainted, and the other half was close to it, yet Mr. Hakat persisted. "You said worldwide. Who in your homeworld could you have fought to inflict such levels of death?" Mr. Hakat was now visibly shaking. "We kind of fought ourselves." That was the final thing Mr. Hakat heard before fainting. Tom was now sitting in a room full of unconscious sentients. Worried for his peers, Tom called the office to explain the situation. Of course, they didn't believe him, but after explaining how, the school got the entirety of the school nurses over in record time. Thanks to Tom's accidental mental attack, a new law was passed. Tom found this out thanks to a message sent from the Terran government directly. Thomas pressed play, and the message began. Dear Thomas Lee Martin, thanks to your antics, we have been forced to pass a new law stating that all humans must always give a disclaimer when talking about human history or culture. End of message. Tom was already having a bad day, but now he was apparently responsible for a new law. Tom's mood went from bad to damn near breaking shit very quickly. On the bright side, he had gotten a notification from the office about HFY. She had woken up and was asking where he was. Tom made his way to the infirmary with a bit of a spring in his step, confusing passers-by as it was not the known, normal way to walk for humans. As he was making his way to the infirmary, he heard some rumors about him that made him uncomfortable. The rumor he heard the most was about him beating the entire history class unconscious. This made Tom think, who would have been able to see the incident and then change the story to such an extent? The News Club, of course. They'd want a story that ruins a person and just happens to give them fame in the process. But still, who exactly was there? The ant creature with the camera. What were they called again? I think the Vincel? Tom was so deep in thought that he nearly walked straight past the infirmary. He stopped with a jolt, nearly making him fall flat in his face. The door slid open, and he walked inside. HFY was sitting in one of the infirmary's beds. Once she noticed Tom, she waved him over with a slight smile. Tom made his way to the bed with a happy expression. Glad you're okay. Sorry about, you know. HFY noticed Tom's relieved tone and smiled deeply. In doing so, she released a small chuckle. Yeah, I'm okay. I was just very surprised to hear such a war be so casually talked about. It's as if you humans are always warring with yourselves on extreme levels. HFY looked at him straight in his eyes. You're joking, right? Tom shook his head, confirming that he was being serious. You mind explaining? Tom was about to start when he remembered the new law he had apparently created. Before I start, I have been told that I must give the appropriate disclaimer. Before you ask, it's because of the history class incident. A new law was created regarding human history and culture. HFY gave a slow nod. Makes sense, I think. Tom began. All history you're about to hear is rated as A++ on the Galactic Government's horror scale. You have been told. To start off, I'd like to point out that we basically haven't ever had proper peace. Ever. We've been fighting ourselves since the earliest known history. HFY was now just blankly staring at Tom, trying to take in the massive load of information, but made sure to nod slightly to keep him talking. May it be full-scale wars, skirmishes, information wars, cold wars, wars between kingdoms or empires, basically the list just keeps going. But one common occurrence is these wars is death. A lot of death. Even during the days of wooden ships and swords, we had wars that had more death than your worst war. One of these being the conquest of Timer. It had nearly 20 million casualties. As Tom was talking, he could hear a familiar clicking, but couldn't place the sound. Well, that's basically all you need to know for now. Tom smiled at HFY's all-too-common slack-jaw expression. For some strange reason, Tom suddenly felt as though he was being watched, as if someone was scoping him out. Tom turned his head with extreme speed, only to catch a very surprised Vincel sitting in a green-coloured tree with drooping branches. It seemed to lose its balance as Tom's predatory gaze landed upon it. Crack! The sound of shattered chitin animated throughout the room. HFY, finally noticing something wrong, looked at Tom in surprise once again. Seems your eyesight is as good as you say. Those Vincel are well known for their perfect camouflage. How did you see it? I couldn't even tell the difference until it fell. I wasn't actually looking for it, just felt as though I was being watched, and anyway, its perfect camouflage was kinda shit. It wasn't even the right colour. It was dark brown, whereas the tree was baby shit green. Your colour vision's that good? I guess. He hadn't realised strong colour vision was that uncommon. After calming HFY down, again, they made their way outside, only to find a large Vincel trying to drag its broken body away from the two looming predators. After a short interrogation that was mainly accomplished by Thomas staring daggers into the Vinsol's compound eyes, they had obtained strong evidence of the news club stalking Tom and Javquar. For a prey species, the Vinsol are surprisingly good at stalking people, Javquar noted. Not really. Javquar stared at him with annoyance. That might be because you have some weird ability to sense when something is watching you. How does anyone even gain that evolutionary trait anyway? Never mind. Forgot Terra's a hellworld. Complete fuck shit. Tom guessed Javquar thought. She said that last part quietly. It was now late afternoon, and Javquar and Tom had finally made their way back to the dorm. The conversation with the headmaster hadn't gone as planned. After giving their evidence, the headmaster seemed a lot more against them than with them, basically letting the Vinsol off scot-free. On the other hand, or Claw in Javquar's case, they had to clean up the garden zone and apologise to the Vinsol. Apparently, Tom had assaulted the Vinsol. That was what the Vinsol said anyway. The headmaster was way too quick to side with that chitin-covered prick. Opening the door, Javquar collapsed, drained after the verbal assault from the headmaster. Luckily, Tom was able to catch her on the way down, and with a very tired smile from Javquar, they made their way through the building. Tom helped Javquar to her bed, then made his way to the kitchen to grab her a glass of water. Unsurprising to Tom, Javquar had already fallen fast asleep by the time he'd gotten there, so he placed the glass on her nightstand and went to bed himself. Without even realizing, Tom had left Javquar's bed heater off.